And it's one of the rare studies where villagers themselves, captured their own experiences, reflected with her support, and then came out with this, document which captures, I think, about 5 different types of experiences, starting with canal to Anganwadi and NREGS, like that.
The topic is, of course, rural development, and as they have already pointed out, the perspective is from the beneficiaries of these rural development schemes. So initially we wrote the whole thing in Kannada, and then it's been translated into English. The report is available online. The stories were actually written, as repeatedly pointed out, by 2 villagers, and they are small farmers, and this was their first attempt at writing. So in that sense, this project was quite novel, because at first I think they thought it might be easy, because they're so used to physical work that they thought there's not much to writing. You just sit down and relax and write something. But once we got started, it became clear that trying to think an idea clearly through, writing it coherently, and they saw that they had to do a lot of backing and forth thing. They would bring us something, and then we would say, look, this is missing, or there's no link from here to here, and so on and so forth. So at the end of it, I think they did find it interesting, but it also was taxing for them. And I also got to learn a lot, because we normally assume that, well, people have finished SSLC, they should be able to write, it shouldn't be so difficult. But it turns out that it's not so simple. I think probably it's a reflection of how the quality of our education in schools has not really allowed SSLC students to have the confidence. So as a result of this project, we tried to encourage them to think a little more deeply. Normally they don't think about these schemes so much. So these reports are really a fruit of that thinking.
While you mentioned at the end of the session, this is how they concluded, but there seemed to be a lot of research, that they got to know about, various guidelines or systems. How did they realize them while they are writing these stories? Maybe that part you could explain a little more.
Well, actually, the feeling I got was they don't know much of the guidelines or the details. It's when I was trying to contextualize it and say that, well, under the NBA scheme, all this is allowed, or all this. They were actually not even interested in the guidelines, because they know that it has no relation to reality. So this is just additional things I added on to our report, saying this is how the scheme was supposed to run, this is what was supposed to happen.
And similarly, typically I was thinking that there are issues like government doing something, and outsider facilitator and villagers, and then the collective action. All these phrases, their own discoveries, or unless we come together, it happens, or it doesn't happen. How did that happen in this?
No, actually, most of the analysis here is my own. I'm just trying to make sense of all these stories, trying to give it some kind of continuity, because they are all different sectors. The stories are a little disparate, and I had some reviewers finding that it's very difficult reading also. So I was just trying to analyze the whole thing from some point of view.
That question, what's the point writing the story? Because we know the story already. Is anyone interested? That's the kind of question. So if you were to put it back, saying this is where we as villagers have found this can happen here, this cannot happen here, this is where we need an outsider, etc. So maybe have you had the opportunity to share it with them, or have essentially, if not, how has their perception of the story changed
with this
over a period of time, right from the start to now and maybe beyond?
I think they still have some doubts about what this is all being written for. And I realized that they are now appreciating it a little more, because we have been saying for a long time, for about 10 years now, that don't use groundwater excessively like this. You'll run out. But we were talking prematurely. It happened 10 years later. And for us, it's such an obvious thing. When water is being extracted at these rates, you're just running out of capital. Now, it was very difficult for them in those days to even accept what they're saying.
So if you were to put it back, saying this is where we as villagers have found this can happen here, this cannot happen here, this is where we need an outsider, etc. So maybe have you had the opportunity to share it with them, or have essentially, if not, how has their perception of the story changed
with this
over a
input.
period of time, right from the start to now, and then beyond?
I think they are now appreciating that what they thought was so obvious, which, these stories, for example, and people like me were having so much trouble, saying that no, these are actually important stories, they need to be written down. So he's able to now see the other side and say that, look, when you were telling us something was so obvious, groundwater depletion, we just didn't believe you.
It's a very fascinating story in terms of methodology, because I had taught qualitative research methods for 2 years, and I found it very, very difficult to teach the students. When I talk about participant observation, they say, what is this? But then what I did was I sent them to the field, saying that, okay, divide them into groups, go and sit at the canteen or where people, are assembled. And then I asked them, coming back, what is your reaction? So, what are the difficulties that you face while doing this kind of exercise? The reason I ask is, it involves a lot of introspection on the part of the community, and it also involves a lot of negative aspects also. How far they were willing to kind of accept or come to terms with their own reality.
The result, this story, all these stories, it was possible to write because we have been living in that area for almost 10 years now, and only over the years we have a few friends. So it is not really a community written story. It is more the perspective of these two friends who have lived there, whom have developed some trust, and we trust them. And but I would always ask them to go back and check their facts, or make inquiries. Are you sure this is how it is? Can't you check this? Just go to the panchayat office, and why don't you ask and do this and that? I did a little bit of that. But apart from that, it's really their perceptions. And the way I would classify these two is that they are in a minority in that community. They do try to reflect. They are not entirely carried away by these mainstream things. And really the key point that I would like some more light on is, you always have one or two here who are thinking a little more sensibly and doing something a little bit